Teach us, Kevin. Remember the dedication.
Okay. Dedication for refuah for all the cholim of Klal Yisrael. Okay.
Amen.
The next malacha is called marking, and in Hebrew it says mesartet, mem shin reish tet tet. Okay. Only one prohibition here: marking by measurement for the purpose of cutting or writing to a particular shape with or without color. This prohibition doesn't apply to food for immediate consumption. For example, marking portions on cake or ice cream. Okay. Next malacha, another a short one. Mechatech, which is cutting to shape. Mem chet taf chet sofit. Chaf sofit. Prohibition, only one prohibition also here. Cutting a pattern or measured lengths into a shape. For example, dividing sheets of paper, cutting a carpet. This malacha doesn't apply to food, which may be cut into measured portions. Cutting units in an unmeasured manner is classified under tearing. Okay, so because that's what they did with the materials in the temple. They had to cut them to shape. They had to cut them to the right shape and size, and they had to mark, before they cut it, they had to draw a line. You know, when you to cut with a whatever instrument they used to cut, or blade, they had to draw a line, and then like cutting around an outline. So you can't do that, but I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
So, all right, so we discussed Rabbi Meir's view and Rabbi Yehuda's view. The Gemara starts a ruling. Rav Elazar said, if one entrusted his ox to an unpaid shomer, then if the ox damaged others, the shomer is liable. But if it was damaged by others, the shomer is exempt. In other words, he need not be reimbursed. Okay? So the Gemara analyzes this ruling. What is the case? If the guardian accepted upon himself responsibility for its damages, then even if it was damaged by others, he should be liable. And if he didn't accept upon himself responsibility for its damages, then even if it damaged others, he should be exempt. So what it's saying is basically that a shomer, a guardian, doesn't have to accept verbally responsibility in order to be liable, either for what the ox damages or for damages that are done to it. Because if he himself accepted responsibility for its damages, it doesn't mean that it's verbal. It means at the time that he assumed responsibility, he did not basically state explicitly that he was not accepting liability for his damages. That's what the Rashba and the Rosh says. So to cut a long story short, the bottom line is as far as the default position is, legally, if you take a car from somebody that's lending it to you, you have to accept responsibility, unless in writing you turn around and say you're not prepared to accept responsibility. Then the owner decides whether or not they want to make you the custodian. But the default position in even South African law is if you take another article of somebody else's, you're responsible as the custodian for that article. That's the default position. So the Gemara is saying that he needn't explicitly state that he's accepting responsibility. That's a given. If he's not prepared to accept responsibility, he should state it. And more importantly, he should state it in writing. So either you state it in writing or you state it in front of two witnesses. There were certain people in those periods of time, I don't know how many amongst Jewish people, etc., that were not literate. So many of the law systems there were regarding witnesses, where you had a proper scribe, somebody had a career as a scribe, and then they would write down what the witnesses said, that they saw this person, etc. So the bottom line is the Gemara is saying, look, how could it be a case if you borrow something where you're not responsible, basically, if your ox that you borrowed or you were taken care of, if it damaged your ox, but you were responsible if it damaged but if it damaged others. Do you understand what I'm saying, guys? Kev, what am I saying?
Say it again for me. Sorry, I was just.
No problem. Okay, so what I'm
something
saying
about being responsible if it damages. Okay.
Yeah. So no problem. What Rav Elazar said is, if one entrusted his ox to an unpaid shomer, then if the ox damaged others, the shomer is liable. But if it was damaged by others, the shomer is exempt. In other words, he need not reimburse the owner.
Yes.
Okay, so the Gemara doesn't understand how you could have a double ruling. Either you're responsible entirely for that ox, whether others damage your ox or whether your ox causes damages. You're responsible for all those legal implications, or you're completely exempt. How can you partially be responsible? So the Gemara explains, Rava said, actually Rav Elazar speaks of a case where the shomer accepted upon himself responsibility for the ox's damage. And here, what are we dealing? Where at the time the ox was entrusted him, the guardian recognized it as a gora. And generally, in such a case, responsibility that ox will not go and damage others, the shomer accepts upon himself, but that others will come and damage it does not enter his mind, and therefore does not take upon himself responsibility for this eventuality. So why they're saying this is that obviously, if you know that your ox has gored other animals in the past, the assumption is that other oxen are very nervous of this animal. Why? Because it displays aggressive behavior and will refrain from attacking it. That's Rashi's opinion. And also, if it goes around the community that this is a habitually goring ox, if you value your possessions, you will keep it well away from the ox that has a bad reputation. So because that's the case, you don't have to worry about other oxen attacking it, because generally it's other people are not going to let their ox near yours. The animals are going to have trepidation when they see the state of your ox. And furthermore, you are liable for your ox because you know its nature is to go, and you have to look after it very, very carefully. So that's how you can have a one-sided discussion. 45b2, we're dealing with the new Mishnah. I'm going to share my screen. Art, you want to read it?
Sure, no problem. Let me just move to the other screen so I can make it bigger.
Sure.
A second, yeah. Mishnah. If a person takes measures to prevent his animal from doing damage, it is nevertheless, but it nevertheless damages, he is exempt from liability. We should discuss the level of prevention necessary to qualify for this exemption. If its owner tied the ox with a rein or locked the gate before it properly, but it went out and damaged, whether it is a tam or a muad, the owner is liable. These are the words of Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda says, if it is tam, the owner is indeed liable, as you say. However, if it is muad, he is exempt, because it is stated regarding a muad, and its owner did not guard it. Whereas the one who guarded, whereas this one was guarded. Rav Eliezer says, the muad has no means of guarding except the knife.
Okay. All right, so this Mishnah isn't dealing with a new subject, yeah?
Sure. Sorry, I don't know what they mean by the knife. I tried to, you explain it to us.
Okay, so Rav Eliezer is saying that whether or not it is muad or tam, no matter how good your guarding is, even if it's a superior guarding, it's not enough to get out of liability, because if it damages, you owe. So short of killing it, you can't be guaranteed that you're not going to end up paying money. That's all he's saying. Does that make sense? So the minute the ox becomes tamul muad, according to Rav Eliezer, it's a good idea to kill it. I don't know how you'd ever keep an ox alive at that point. I must be honest. But that's his exposition. But it's, hang on a second, it's only as regard to a muad with Rav Eliezer. Let me just share my screen again. I want to show you, Kevin, something. So, Kevin's question is good. So Kevin, here it says, Rav Eliezer says, the muad has no means of guarding except for the knife. So that means the minute the animal becomes a muad, a superior guarding isn't going to help you against liability if it manages to break free, even if you stuck it in Fort Knox. And therefore, it's a good idea to shecht it, otherwise you're going to be paying a lot of money. Whereas,
also, you'd have to stone it, which you're going to lose money as well.
Sorry?
If it kills, it means you're going to have to stone it, and you'll lose money if it's more.
Correct, but the point of it is, even if it damages, you still have to pay with a superior guarding. Whereas Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda are both. Rabbi Meir certainly says a superior guarding suffices, and Rabbi Yehuda says even a lesser guarding suffices, and Rabbi Eliezer said no amount of guarding suffices. You're liable if it damages.
Plus, I also know if it's more, you have to pay from your superior land, not from its body.
Exactly. So it's going to be
expensive.
Expensive.
It's going to be
exactly.
And it's full payment,
So, the Gemara gives the sources for the first two opinions recorded in the Mishnah. What is Rav Meir's reason? Rav Meir holds that ordinary oxen are not in a guarded state, meaning the average person doesn't guard his ox at all, but rather allows it to roam about unstrained. And under such conditions, the merciful one said that a tam is liable for damages, which implies that a tam requires a lesser level of guarding. Now, we've already said that a lesser level of guarding doesn't mean a minimal guarding. It just means the average guarding. When we talk about a superior guarding, we're saying that basically you go to extreme measures to look after the animal. Do more than the average owners do. Okay. So, so where does he get this from? Basically, the merciful one said regarding a muad, and he did not guard it, which implies that a muad requires a superior level of guarding. And Rabbi Meir expounds a Gezerah Shava comparing the goring of a tam to the goring of a muad. Okay, so when you first read it, the Gemara doesn't seem to make sense, because when we read the Mishnah, it says that Rabbi Meir requires a superior guarding for both the tam and the muad. Okay, but the Gemara first states that the merciful one said that a tam is liable for damages, requiring that a tam requires a lesser guarding. So it then states that the merciful one said regarding a muad, and he did not guard it, which implies that a muad requires a superior level of guarding, assuming it's escaped. Okay, so why? Because the words he did not guard it are superfluous. So you can actually have a Gezerah Shava, because the Torah could have simply said that a muad is liable, and we would have understood on our own that this refers to where the ox owner didn't guard the animal, just as we understood in the case of the tam. If the Torah nevertheless said, and he did not guard it, it must be required to give a greater watching than we assume. In other words, to tell us that he must watch a muad with a superior guarding, because a lesser guarding is not considered a guarding for a muad. Okay? So basically, through a Gezerah Shava, he compares the tam to a muad, which needs a superior guarding in order to be exempt, thus requiring a superior guarding for a tam as well. That's Rashi's explanation. Now, the one thing that I don't quite get is that I understand why he gets the Gezerah Shava, because you would say that there are some rabbinic opinions that turn around and say that there's is it a mammon, is it compensation tam, or is it a knas? Those that say it's a knas, meaning that the animal is generally chilled and it's relaxed, and the only reason why you're charging a penalty is to make sure that this animal doesn't create a danger in the future. But it's not because you owe the money because you were negligent. But the problem is, we learned a pasuk, I don't know if you remember, of where it was in Exodus, that for a tam it required a superior guarding. I don't know if you guys remember.
Sure.
So where that's required, I don't understand why you would need a Gezerah Shava. Does that make sense? Because Rabbi Meir is saying the Gezerah Shava comes from the Muad to the Tam, not from the Tam to the Muad.
Then it makes no sense.
Do you see what I'm saying, Gav?
Yeah.
Then it doesn't make any sense. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you look at the wording of the Gemara, it says, which implies that a Muad requires a superior level of guarding because of the words regarding a Muad, and he did not guard it, because otherwise it just said you'd be liable. And Rav Meir expounds the Gezerah Shava comparing the goring of a Tam to the goring of a Muad. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem, because if you want to say that there's a biblical verse, which we saw at Tam, I don't remember it offhand, I'll have a look. Then as far as a Muad is concerned, you're taking the Tam and you're making that a Gezerah Shava and Muad, then we make sense. In other words, if at Tam you have to do a superior guarding, then even more so an animal that is a habitual gorer, you would need to do a superior guarding based on pure logic. Here it's saying that the Gezerah Shava has to come from Muad, because it said the merciful one then said regarding Muad, and he did not guard it. Because of the superfluous word, and he did not guard it, instead of saying you're liable for a Muad. So therefore, if the Gezerah Shava is on the Muad and we're extracting it from Tam, it doesn't make any sense. And the reason I'm saying it, not if we read there was a biblical verse to look after your Tam with a superior guarding. Am I making sense, guys? So that's something I'm going to have to come back to you with.
Yeah.
So the Gemara now explains Rav Yehuda's reasoning. Rav Yehuda, however, holds that ordinary oxen are in a guarded state. In other words, people generally watch their oxen with a lesser guarding. And under such conditions, the merciful one said that a Tam pays damages, which implies that a Tam requires a superior level of guarding if you don't want to pay those damages. Okay? And the merciful one then said, and he did not guard it regarding a Muad, implying that a Muad requires a superior level of guarding. This constitutes an amplification followed by an amplification. I'm going to explain this now. Okay? And the function of an amplification after an amplification is only to limit, in other words, to limit the force of the law being discussed. In this case, Scripture limited the superior guarding of one's Muad ox. Hence, according to Rav Yehuda, although a Tam requires a superior guarding, the guarding required for a Muad is limited to a lesser level. And if you should argue that the Gezerah Shava between the goring of a Tam and the goring of a Muad teaches that just as a lesser guarding suffices for a Muad, so it suffices for a Tam, the merciful one limited this limitation to a Muad by stating, and he did not guard it, indicating that the limitation applies only to this one, the Muad, and not to the other, the Tam. I'll explain this now, guys, don't worry. But this verse is needed for the not. That's what the Gemara is saying, for the word not. So the Gemara says, if so, that the sole purpose of this verse is to limit the required level of guarding one's Muad, let the merciful one write, and he did not guard. Why is it necessary to state, and he did not guard it? The added pronoun it implies a limitation to this one and not the other. So let me make a very, very complicated story simple. In other words, when we talk about an amplification followed by another amplification, which in turn results in a limitation of the requirement to guard one's Muad. Okay, where do we learn this? Do you remember that page that Kevin taught us on the exegesis by the Meiri in the Chumash? Not in the Chumash, in the Sidra. I think it was on page 39.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Before it's part of Shachrit, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have two amplifications that comes to nullify, let me explain to you what that means. It's like a double negative. If I say Jews are not allowed in this Nazi club, it's only for white Protestants, WASPs, and no blacks and no Jews. So if you say Jews are not allowed in this club, Gavin, are you with me?
I am listening.
All right, Jews are not allowed in this club. What does that mean? There's no Jews. If I say non-Jews are not allowed in this club, what am I saying?
The non-Jews are always allowed.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying this. There's two signs. The one says Jews are not allowed. And if I say non-Jews are not allowed, it's implying the opposite. It's a double negative. Because if I say Jews are not allowed, Jews can't come in. If I say non-Jews are not allowed, only Jews can come in.
Say non-Jews are not allowed.
Oh, so then they cancel each other out.
Did you say non-Jews are not allowed? I didn't hear you correctly. Okay.
No, they cannot cancel. They cancel each other out.
Correct. A double negative cancels itself out. So if you have two amplifications, the one cancels each other out. So what Rav Yehuda is saying, this is an amplification on the tum, because there's a biblical verse that says you have to guard your ox properly, okay, with the superior guarding, and then with the muad, it said, and he didn't guard it properly, which means if you have two double amplifications, it means it cancels the one out, and he says you're canceling the one out for muad. Okay, so before you think again that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that for muad you pay nothing, and for tam, if you did a superior guarding, if you did a lesser guarding for muad, you pay nothing if it damages, and for tam you need a superior guarding. We're not saying that, because Rabbi Yehuda is saying, look, the tam portion is in its place. Unless the guarding is superior, you pay the tam no matter what. But the only thing you don't pay is that extra half that's coming from choice property with regard to a muad if you fail to do a superior guarding, which means he's saying that the payment for the tam and the payment for a muad is exactly the same. That's exactly it. If you do a lesser guarding, you still have to pay half the damages for the superior guarding part. Again, if it's superior guarding, you're off the hook. If it's an average guarding, which is termed a lesser guarding by comparison, you're off the hook for the muad portion, but not the tam. Okay, so that's very straightforward. So now we want to say the Mishnah has taught three opinions as to the level of guarding required for an ox. The Gemara cites a fourth. It was taught in a brisa. Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov said, whether the ox that guard was a tam or muad, if its owner guarded it with a lesser guarding, he is exempt. So the one thing I don't want you to get confused at is Rav Eliezer and Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay? Because if you remember correctly, Rav Eliezer was the most stringent. He said the minute the animal becomes a muad, you better kill it, because no matter how well you guard it, it's gonna cost you money. There's no excuse for it. Why? Because he holds you holding a dangerous animal. It's like you're having an American pit bull. So since you're having an American pit bull, it absolutely doesn't matter. You should never have an animal like that in your care. The minute it becomes muad, you got to get rid of it. Fine. So Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov is the most lenient. Okay? He said that whether the ox was a tam or a muad, you can do a lesser guarding and you're exempt. Okay? So that's the Eliezer's at the opposite end of the spectrum. So again, the most lenient is Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. You said tam or muad, lesser guarding, you're exempt. Then Rav Yehuda that says a lesser guarding, you're exempt for muad, but not for the tam. Then Rabbi Meir is saying that you need a superior guarding for both muad and tam. And Rav Eliezer says for a muad, even a superior guarding is not sufficient. And you're to get out of the financial obligation, you might as well put the animal to death or sell its meat to the butchery or whatever the case may be. So we want to know the most lenient opinion, Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. What's his reasoning? He concurs with Rabbi Yehuda, who said that for a muad, a lesser guarding suffices. and he expounds the Gezerah Shava, comparing the goring of a tam to the goring of a muad. So he, for some reason, takes the Gezerah Shava the other way around, which was the opposite of Rabbi Meir. He's saying that the Gezerah Shava lets you off the hook for muad, and now lets you off the hook, would let you off the hook then for tam, if it's a superior guarding. A lesser guarding would suffice. You don't need a superior guarding. But Rabbi Meir said, just like you need a superior guarding for tam, for muad, we need it for tam. Does that make sense? So they see it the opposite way. So listen, it was in the 39th daf where it talked about a superior and lesser guarding. And I couldn't find the biblical verse in the notes. I went from note 13 to 15. I couldn't see it there. But obviously, that's the explanation that we're holding for. But then the Gemara modifies Rav Yehuda's ruling. Rav Ada bar Ahava said, Rav Yehuda absolved the owner of a muad that was watched with a lesser guarding only with respect to the muad portion of the ox, but the tam portion remains in its place. So I've explained that already and the reason why. You cannot think that a muad would be less of a payment than a tam. It would be equal. You just don't pay the muad section of it for a lesser guarding. That's all. Okay. Another Amoira disagrees with Rav Ada bar Ahava. Rav said, a muad for the right horn is not muad for the left horn. So what do we mean? Is that basically, if an animal gores 3 times with its right horn, it acquires the status of a muad only for future gorings that are done with that horn. Ravad explains that the ox was seen to gore only oxen that stood to its right, whereas those that stood to its left, it didn't gore. Okay? So now we know what that horn means. So the Gemara analyzes the ruling. They said, in accordance with whose view did Rav say this? What do you mean, whose view? Well, the whole purpose of Rav's ruling can't be to state that for subsequent gorings with its right horn, liability is full damages, whereas for goring with its left horn, which is not a muad, there's liability for half damages, right? Because there's a Mishnah on 37a, and we already learned several examples, that the basic principle, in other words, that a muad for one thing is not a muad for another. Moreover, guys, when we learned that Mishnah, we learned a greater novelty. We learned that a muad for people is not considered a muad for animals. Remember there was that discussion with Rabbi Yehuda, etc., and Rav Zavad. Remember that whole discussion about, is it muad for this, is it muad for that, is it muad for all? Okay? So basically, it's you don't have to state the fact that if it's muad for the right horn, which is the animal's strongest side, it's not considered a muad for the left horn. I mean, it's obvious. Rather, Rav's intent must be to teach that the level of guarding required for 2 horns is different. That's according to Rashi. Now, I must be honest with you, for me it's a chiddush, because if you'd have said to me that the animal comprises of different parts, and for some parts it's tam and some parts for muad, we never really discussed that in this 37th
No, never.
You know, maybe this big sages did, but it wasn't in Schottenstein, I promise you.
Listen, in theory, an animal, it won't happen because obviously the muad will take precedence, but you can, in theory, be liable twice. If it hits with the right horn and the left horn, you'll be muad with the right and tam with the left. You have to make 2 payments. But obviously, I presume the muad takes precedence over it. It will supersede the tam part.
Look, I don't know how it works. I suppose if you're in a fist fight and you knock somebody twice with the left and once with the right, whatever the total of their medical bills, you pay. You know,
but it can't exceed the muad, so it will be the maximum of the muad.
Yeah, but
unless it does 2 separate people, it does 2 separate animals, one with the left, one with the right. Then what do you do? Because the animal is going to become muad, it's going to be stoned, and then you still got this tam problem.
Well, I suppose you would need witnesses or anything else. What animal?
What animal? I don't know.
I didn't see an animal gore. Exactly. So that's exactly why I said you'd need witnesses, Gavin, twice to the right and once to the left. And
So
I
then
must tell
please
you
give us
something.
drawings, Damon. You're very good at drawings. Please bring a drawing of this tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we can see this. Put there left horn, right horn. You can use Alan Carr.
Yeah. Okay, so Rashi is saying Rav's intent must be to teach that the level of guarding required for the two horns is different. Okay, so I didn't even know that you could be muad for one part of the animal and tam for another. So that's
a bit weird.
Was a chiddush.
And this what you're saying now is also a chiddush, that you can have two separate guardings now because of that.
Yeah, well, that would make sense actually
In theory.
as a consequence. That actually does make sense.
Yeah, it is a consequence, though. But it's also a chiddush, because I would never expected that.
Okay, so okay. Hang on a sec.
A cranberry like that chiddush, Damon.
Damon, you always tell me you're my cat, but your cats I say nothing for. I can't say anything.
Your cat's lying very peacefully like a lion there, Arthur.
Lying here in the sun part. Well,
Lying.
All right, guys,
you can hardly walk.
Guys, the Gemara analyzes this ruling. They said in accordance with whose view did Rav say this? If he said it in accordance with Rabbi Meir, this can't be. Why, guys, can't it be? I'm testing you. Why?
Sorry, just repeat that, please, Damon.
What's the question, sir? I didn't hear what you said now.
Please, yeah.
Okay, so Rav is turning around and saying, like, basically, there's if the one horn is muad and the other one is tam, it requires two levels of guarding. So is he quoting Rabbi Meir or is he quoting Rabbi Yehuda? Tell me if he's quoting Rabbi Meir, yes or no. Same with Rabbi Yehuda.
No,
logic.
Not Rabbi Meir. It's Rabbi
Why?
Yehuda. Well, because I can't remember Rabbi Yehuda properly, but Rabbi Meir, it has to be a strong, a superior guarding for both.
Exactly.
It can't be.
That's exactly it. It didn't matter.
Default, it has to be Rabbi Yehuda.
It didn't matter which horn did the damage. If you don't guard it properly, you're still paying. The guarding doesn't matter. The amount matters. With Rabbi Meir, the amount matters. And what you're paying for matters. Yes, from choice property, full payment compared to half payment from the body of the animal. But the guarding method doesn't differ because you need a superior guarding for both a tam and a muad. Excellent, Gavin. So then it must be quoting Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, except there's a slight problem. Okay, why would Rav specify subsequent gorings that are done with the left horn? Even gorings that are done with the right horn are also subject to the exact same liability. For the right horn has a tam portion and it has a muad portion. So what we are saying is it can't even be agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda for some reason. I'll tell you why. If I'm saying that a superior guarding is required for tam but not muad, right? And your animal hasn't done a superior guarding, but then for muad you need a lesser guarding. You're only paying the tam portion anyway, because it's paid. The tam portion is in its place. You pay the tam no matter what. If you owe for the muad, you pay that extra half from choice property. But because the tam requires a superior guarding, if you've done a lesser guarding, you just don't pay the muad section because you don't have to do a superior guarding for muad, so you're stuck with tam. So whether it's a tam or muad, if you do a lesser guarding, you have to pay the tam portion. It's the same either way in terms of financial calculation. Does everybody see that?
No.
Guys, if you don't, ask me. Art? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm off mute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah, I got it. I listened to the rabbi.
So what I'm asking you is, why wouldn't it make any difference according to Rabbi Yehuda? I know Gavin knows. I'm asking you, Arth.
Why would it make any difference to Rabbi Yehuda?
Yeah.
Isn't it what Gavin said, but it doesn't make a
No,
difference?
Rabbi Meir is holding that you need a superior guarding, whether it's tam or muad. So therefore, a lesser guarding means you're going to have to cough up and pay. Either way. But why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who said that for a tam, you need a superior guarding, but a muad, you need a lesser guarding?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
I didn't understand because it sounded backwards. It doesn't sound. I mean, I understand they're all behind a locked gate. I know that. That's your basic standard. It's behind a locked gate. But why would it be the other way around?
Okay, hang on a second. Have we got, Kev, one question? You leaving, what time do you have to leave? We got
10 minutes. I'd like to go. If otherwise, I'll have it at home. It's okay.
No, not at all.
Because tomorrow I can't go to shul. I've got to
What were you
shoot
going
at
to ask,
5:30.
Kev?
I'm just saying, if there's damage, basically the minimum payment will have to be a time payment regardless. Is that?
Okay, so
I'm
Kevin
understanding.
actually understood. Arthur, I'm going to explain it to you. Firstly, Arthur's asking a different question. I understand why Arthur's confused because it's counterintuitive. Because Arthur's saying specifically, and the answer is going to solve your confusion. Because Arthur is saying, why would you need a better guarding, superior guarding, for a tam that's known to be relaxed and tame, and you can be much more chilled out and relaxed if your animal has got a track record of being dangerous? It doesn't make sense. I can't hear you, Arthur.
No, I think it does. You know why?
Okay.
Because if you got a tame animal, you don't know, and you're not guarding it as well, it can do something. Where if you got a muad, okay, you know it's going to do something.
Okay, so then why are you entitled to guard it less? If you know it's going to do something, why are you off the hook if you look after it less well?
That is the $1 million question.
That is the Arthur. Your question was solid. It was a solid question, no matter which way you look at it. So if you know the animal's got a bad track record, then even more so you should look after it well. You know you have to. So the thing of it is, the answer is that Rabbi Yehuda has to say off that the tam portion remains in its place. Because if he says that the muad is paid from choice property, then what you'd have is for a lesser guarding, you'd be off the hook for muad, and you wouldn't pay anything, because it means you're paying it all from choice property. So a lesser guarding suffices, which means you did a lesser guarding, which was average, very average, considering the dangerous nature. Then you're off the hook, you don't pay anything. But all of a sudden, for a tame animal, you need to put it into Fort Knox. And then if you don't, you're responsible. And then you're responsible for half payment damages. So that wouldn't make sense. So in order for Rav Yehuda to at least make sense, it's saying that you don't pay any more for the muad than the tam. It's not more lenient. The only way you don't pay more is if you say, with muad, the only difference you make between muad and tam is your additional half payment damages that you make to make complete repayment or restitution of the damage you caused has to be from choice property. So if my ox kills Arthur's ox at 200 zuz, and it's tam, and my ox was worth only 80 zuz, okay, because it was a puny thing, then I only owe Arthur technically 100 zuz, but because there's another leniency on the attacking ox, and it's a puny thing, I only owe Arthur 80 zuz. Now, if it's muad, then I owe Arthur the full damages, which is 200 zuz. So the 80 zuz I'd hand over Arthur my ox, okay, and I'd have to pay that extra 120 zuz in cash, okay. So that means the tam portion is in place. You don't pay it all from choice property, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So if you need a lesser guarding for muad, okay, and for tam a superior guarding, and you've done a lesser guarding, then you still owe the tam because you didn't do a superior guarding. So you owe the tam portion, but you don't owe the muad portion. So in other words, whether it's tam or muad, for a lesser guarding, you're still paying the tam portion. You just don't pay a muad portion. That's all. So in other words, if it's tam, you need a superior guarding. If you don't put it to the best guarding possible, you owe the half payment damages from the attacking animal. Okay? And then it's saying for a muad, if you didn't do that best guarding, you still have to pay what you owe for tam, because the superior guarding is required for tam. You just don't pay the balance of the half payment damages from choice property. So whether it was a tam or muad, for a lesser guarding, you're only paying the tam portion. So he's not saying with the muad, like the other rabbis, that you pay it all from choice property. Then you wouldn't pay anything for muad, and you'd pay half damages from tam. So all he's saying is for muad, you don't pay anything more than tam for a lesser guarding. That's all he's saying.
Yeah.
Is that making sense a little bit?
A little bit.
Okay. So what we're saying is that the question in the Gemara is why Rav can't be quoting Rabbi Meir. Why? Because Rabbi Meir says unless it's a superior guarding for tam or muad, you have to pay. You have to pay either the tam, which is half payment, or full payment from choice property. Either way, you're paying. The amount is not the same, Arthur, with Rabbi Meir, but Rav's exposition doesn't make a difference because you, according to Rav, it doesn't matter if the one horn is tam or muad, in a way, because you need a superior guarding for both. Does that make sense? The only difference, the only part of Rav's argument that would make sense according to Rabbi Meir is you pay full damages from choice property for the muad horn. And for the tam horn, you pay half payment damages from choice, from the body of the animal. But the amount of culpability means the guarding level is the same, not the amount. So Rav does make a difference, Gav, with regards to the amount, but not with regard to the responsibility of the guarding method. Okay. And Rav Yehuda doesn't make sense according to Rav. He's not supporting Rabbi Yehuda because whether it's a tam or a muad horn, the muad requires a lesser guarding, so you're only paying the tam portion either way. So we're saying it doesn't make sense. So they said, actually, Rav's ruling was stated in accordance with Rav Yehuda. However, Rav disagrees with Rav Ada bar Ahava's interpretation of Rav Yehuda's position. And this is what Rav meant to say. In only as such a case, a muad for the right horn and a tam for the left that you will find within a single ox portions of tam and muad. So what does Rav disagree with Rav Ada bar Ahava? He's saying that, look, he's holding that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you pay for muad from choice property for the whole amount. Okay, the whole amount, not and the tam portion doesn't remain in its place. Otherwise, there'd be no financial difference. So he doesn't agree with Rav Ada bar Ahava's exposition that Rav Yehuda says the tam amount stays in its place. Okay. Okay. However, in the case of a full muad, a muad for both horns, you will never find an ox that has a tam portion at all. In other words, its owner will never be liable for half damages, even in the event that measures sufficient for guarding a muad were taken, because the owner is fully absolved from liability. So he can only say that if he's saying that Rabbi Yehuda, Rav is saying that it comes from choice property, the muad section. And by the way, it says here that what is the reason? How could it be that muad should pay less than tam? Kevin, we got 1 minute left, and that's it, right? How could it be? So Meiri and Panay Yeshua suggest that when an animal is declared a muad by the court, the fact that it becomes public knowledge means it's the public's responsibility somewhat to keep themselves and their property at a safe distance from the ox. So they're saying, listen, the owner's off the hook because it's becoming a public hazard. People shouldn't bring their oxes near there. As far as I'm concerned, I don't see why the owner should get off more. I could understand why the owner has to pay the same as the tam because it's the public responsibility. But why would the owner pay nothing? Arthur, your question is strong. It really, really doesn't make sense to me. Okay? And then I've got, Kevin, if we take 2 minutes, we finish the chapter. Can we take 2 more minutes? We finish the whole chapter 4.
Okay, 2 minutes. Okay,
2 minutes.
Okay.
That's it. All right, guys.
Okay.
The Mishnah states, Rav Eliezer said the muad has no means of guarding except for the knife, etc. The opinion is analyzed. Rabba said, what is Rav Eliezer's reasoning? For scripture states regarding the muad, and he did not guard it, which implies henceforth this ox has no means of guarding. Another Moira challenged this explanation. Abaya said to Rabba, If so, then what is written regarding a pit, and he will not cover it? Will you also say henceforth this pit needs no method of covering, no means of covering? And if you will say it's deed so that there's nothing when one dug a pit short of refilling it to protect himself from liability in the event that the pit causes a damage, while we learned in the Mishnah, if he covered it properly and the ox or donkey fell into it and died, he is exempt. I'm going to explain this now. So it's saying, look, what does it mean that he's fully responsible for a muad? We learned that with a pit, even when you muad automatically for a pit, and it's fine if you cover the pit with a manhole. You don't have to refill the pit. So why would you have to slaughter the animal when it becomes muad? With a pit, you don't. You just take the hazard and stop it from becoming a hazard. You look after the ox the same way that you'd look after a pit and cover it. They're both muad. So what's this thing about you having to kill the ox to protect yourself or refill the pit entirely to protect yourself? It's nonsense. It doesn't make sense. And the answer is, the buyer therefore offers his own explanation. Rather, buyer said, this is Rav Eliezer's reasoning, as it was taught in a brisa. Rav Nassan says, from where do we learn that a person should not raise a vicious dog in his house and should not place a rickety lad in his house? For the verse states, and you shall not place blood in your house. Okay? And that is in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 8. And what it's saying is that it's different in the case of a pit, because if you're covering it, you're covering it. But when you're dealing with a hazard that you don't remedy, like a rickety ladder or an American pit bull, a vicious animal, you have to pay if it's muad, because it's got a track record of being aggressive, Arthur. And since it has a track record of being aggressive, your loss is that if you keep such a dangerous thing in your house, you've got blood on your hands. If you know your ladder's rickety, either repair it or get rid of it. If you know you've got an American pit bull that's wanted on charges of damage to human beings, put it down, because there's no excuse for having blood on your hands. All right, we finished the fourth chapter.
Thanks, and so I
Moving right along in search of good times and good news. With good friends you can't lose.
This could become a habit.
Opportunity knocks once, let's reach out and grab it.
Yeah!
Together we'll nab it.
We'll hitchhike, bus, or yellow cabin.
Cabot?
Moving right along. Footloose and fancy free.
Getting there is half the fun, come share it with me.
Moving right along.
Dum-dum-dum-dum, we'll learn to share the load.
We don't need a map to keep the show on the road.
Hey, Fozzie, I want you to turn left if you come to a fork in the road.
Yes, sir. Turn left at the fork in the road. Turn left.
I don't believe that.